Good evening and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Tonight, our special guest is Dr. Arvind Panagariya, the Vice Chairman of the NITI Aayog. The NITI Aayog is, of course, the government's main think tank, a crucial element in making policy. Dr. Panagariya has also been a professor of political economy at Columbia University. He also, along with Professor Bhagwati, came to represent the antithesis of the Amartya Sen School of Economics in a way, and a man who's never been shy of expressing his political opinions. A man of many parts. Dr. Panagariya, thank you for being with us tonight with an audience of young students. Thank you all for being here.
My pleasure.
Dr. Panagariya, it's great to have you in a week when we've reached the last hurdle of what's being seen as a game changer Indian reform, and that's really the goods and services tax. Why do you think this is so crucial for India's reform process, and coming on the heels of demonetization, which do you think will be the bigger reform?
They're both huge. They're both huge, and both one required a lot of courage, the other requires a lot of navigation, but they're both huge reforms. And I think, for the GST in particular, ultimately this is going to be the stepping stone to creating a single market in India, and that carries huge benefits.
Some concerns which have been raised over GST by the opposition, one has been the fact that what was initially visualized as perhaps a one nation, one tax has eventually come to be a larger tax system with 4 different slabs, concerns that it will be too complicated. Also worries about some of the rates could be set as high as 40%. Now the Congress has consistently opposed that. Do you think these are justified worries?
Well, look, I'm not particularly worried by any of these. Take your multiple tax rates issue. I think the bigger gain that we have from the GST is having a single rate of tax on any given product. That is what allows there to be a single market across the country. The variation across products is not such a huge issue. And in a situation in which we already are coming from multiple excise tax rates, going to a single rate could actually be quite disruptive. Simply because, some products, let's say, have tax rates of 4%, and if you went to a single rate of, say, 16, 17, whatever it is, you'll see a big jump happening. And that is too much of an adjustment very quickly. Moreover, it also will, be a bit inflationary for those particular products at least. So right now, with 3 or 4 rates, it's a good way to transition into the GST. And we can revisit this issue of then unifying the rates.
So a gradual process to reach the ideal in a sense. But you made that point just now, saying that both demonetization and GST were actually huge. Now, there were many who expressed some worry about the fact that what will the impact be on the Indian economy of both coming so soon to the other. And while demonetization has been politically vindicated with the huge wins in Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra's civic elections, the economic verdict is still very much out. Is the timing right really for such drastic changes in the Indian system within months of each other? We still, what would you say on the economic impact of demonetization?
So, I see the drastic change as only one, which was the demonetization, because GST has been an ongoing process. It will remain an ongoing process, so therefore it is anticipated. If anything, actually, it's a little delayed rather than coming in too early. So I don't see that is a drastic change. That's with anticipation. Now there will be some bit of disruption in the initial year because the entire new infrastructure will have to be put in place, which is there, but also I think a lot of the taxpayers will have to begin to understand and become participants in the system and all. So that bit of dislocation, you can say, initially, but I think it is all for the better as we go forward in the 2nd and 3rd year of the GST. Now, demonetization, personally, I really think you said only political vindication, but I think there is also economic vindication, because in the end, all the doomsday predictions on the growth rates did not come true. The economy actually sustained the growth rate at 7% plus. And I think, I personally see this much more in the context of the Prime Minister's promise to combat corruption. I think, there is both an economic aspect to that, there is also a moral, ethical aspect to that. And on both counts, I think this was a very important step in weeding out corruption. And it was not a step taken in isolation. Several other steps had been taken prior to this, and certainly this is not a last step either. So there will be more to come from what the Prime Minister himself has said.
Let's take some of the students. I think Vikram from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade has a question. Vikram, go ahead with your question.
Hello, good evening, sir. So my question is related to demonetization and GST only. So with demonetization also, we actually saw an impact on the economic growth. The GDP growth slowed down. And after this demonetization, even when GST would come up, it would have short-term negative impact. So how do you look onto that? And do you really think the long-term, whatever long-term benefits we would have after demonetization and GST, do you really think it would outweigh the short-term negative impacts that it had?
Look, first of all, on demonetization, even the short-term impact, we can't really say that there was a major or even perceptible kind of negative impact on the growth rate so far. I mean, we still have to have the fourth quarter figures for the year 16-17, and maybe larger impact will come in. But right now, whatever data we got, whatever estimates we got, I really don't see that this has a discernible negative impact. So I'll wait for the data to come, and let's see what happens. It's possible fourth quarter will turn out worse, but let's wait for those estimates to come in. In the longer run, there is no question that the impact is going to be favorable. For one thing, we have actually managed to take advantage of the demonetization to push significantly digitization, and even though as cash comes in, there is some kind of decline or it recedes a little, but still we'll end up when the matters when the transactions stabilize on the digital platforms, we'll still see that we have achieved a higher level of digitization. That I think is a very important a positive step, and I think also for the future transactions, it tells the citizenry that, look, this Prime Minister is determined to combat corruption. So we better be careful when we carry out these transactions in partially black, partially white, what have you. So I think we will reduce corruption going forward, and that also is for the good of the economy.
Does it disappoint you? Does it interest you that many economists often have questioned the statistics and figures that are coming out, and even the latest GDP figures? People have questioned them and have pointed to the fact that the informal sector, which is likely to have been hardest hit with job losses, is not even recorded in these growth rates in a sense. Also the fact that your other sparring partner in a sense, Professor Sen, who was in Dialogues a few weeks ago, made the point that demonetization in a sense is an unguided missile. So you made the point about corruption, but has it actually brought it down? Have you been able to actually establish that? So we can have lots of so-called aims of demonetization ranging from ending terrorism to counterfeit currency to ending corruption, but does that bear out on the ground? Do you think India's GDP figures are robust and will withstand scrutiny?
I have continuously maintained, actually, I was not among the skeptics. I have continuously maintained that whatever the CSO has done in rejigging its methodology is an improvement over the previous methodology we were using. Better data, better use of the data. And this, soon after I came here, this was done, and I went through very carefully with our chief of CSO, and I saw nothing wrong with the methodology. In fact, a lot of this skepticism resulted from the fact that the WPI, the wholesale price index, was going in a very different direction than the CPI was going. And that, of course, was creating a very different kind of relationship between the GDP at current prices and GDP at real GDP. So the GDP deflator basically came unhooked because of this very different movement of wholesale prices versus the CPI. Now, actually, the wholesale price index is back up to match with the CPI. We'll see that the two will come together, and all the complaints that were being made, would go away. Because methodologically, we are doing something better. Now, people who complain, right, there are parts of the economy that even when the government actually inherited this from the previous government, were doing very badly. And we know, we can talk about it, but basically there were sectors that were in very bad shape steel, textiles, even infrastructure projects, etc. That part of the economy, sure enough, it was doing poorly. But we also focused, I think the media also focused disproportionately on those. But what about a lot of the other sectors which continue to do quite well? You can look at auto parts, you can look at machinery sector, you can look at pharmaceuticals, IT, ITES. These are the sectors, these are the stronger sectors of India, and these sectors actually have been doing well. So it's quite consistent for one part of the corporates sort of complaining that, look, things are not so good on the ground, and yet the economy overall doing well, because there is another large section of the economy which is doing well. So that's about
the informal sector not being factored in is not an issue, you think, when you look at the impact of demonetization?
Look, informal sector
has never been factored in.
Yeah, and even at least as far as the counting or estimating the GDP in the informal sector is concerned, we are making some improvements in the methodology over what we were doing before. So it's not like the informal sector was being measured with great precision before, and right. So there is that.
That's always been, in fact, I think, a problem with how we look at our GDP.
Exactly. So we still need better and more improvements, but that will happen as we strengthen our statistical systems, data gathering. But right now, I certainly don't feel terribly skeptical about the GDP series at all. I think it is capturing what it is supposed to capture. Now,
and Professor Sen's comparing demonetization to an unguided missile.
Right, and I thought it was pretty guided and calculated. I mean, it's not. I mean, now the details have come out. A lot of discussions had actually happened on this issue, so that those fears have been laid to rest, and. I'm not quite sure if it was such an unguided missile. We should have seen destruction somewhere. I don't see any destruction. Actually, if anything, basically the economy robustly was able to withstand the shock that got. I mean, I agree that this was a shock, but in the end, to do anything good, you sometimes have to do the surgery, which was done, and we have come out quite well, very healthy actually out of it. And I think Prime Minister was also right when he pointed out that, look, when you want to perform surgery, you want to make sure the patient actually is in good health, not in bad health. So his timing was also, from that perspective, quite reasonable. And so I really must say that, I don't fully understand where Professor Sen's criticisms are coming from.
Well, the Prime Minister, interestingly, also made a dig at Harvard economists. But let me just ask you, in your earlier role as a Columbia economist, internationally, economists across didn't say that there were worries about this decision. Even Professor Geeta Gopinath of Harvard pointed out what she felt were flaws. Many other international economists spoke about it. I made the point that politically the Prime Minister has been supported, but as an economist, would you have recommended a step like demonetization? Let's leave the political or the moral ethical angle aside. As an economist, would you have recommended it?
So, this is a question which is very hypothetical. I can speak to whether I think this was a right thing to do or not, and I personally think that this was the right thing to do.
Right.
A lot of the Western press, you are right, actually Western press, Western scholars generally have come out negatively on it. And this is because they are seeing the whole problem from the Western angle. From the Western angle, what they're saying is that, look, what we would do is phase out the high denomination note rather than actually make it no longer legal tender. Right? So this would be that, look, don't print any more new $100 notes or 500 euro notes, and let it be phased out. But the problem we faced here was a very different one. After all, the corruption, the order of corruption was very large. The 500 rupee and 1000 rupee notes were massively used for those transactions, what we call the black economy transactions. And so you have to, at some point, in fact, come in and say, okay, this ceases to be legal tender.
Though interestingly, Dr. Panagariya, just yesterday, just a few days ago, in fact, the government was asked a question, and I think it was in Parliament, the government was asked a question and said we actually had no estimate of the black money that was in circulation, no official estimate of the black money that was in circulation for demonetization. So when you, and again as a professor, as head of NITI Aayog, what are the figures? Because that's again been the kind of cloud that has been over the data that has been available, both in terms of how much black money was actually in circulation, how much of it is in 500,000 rupee notes, how much money has actually come back fully. There's been a veil over that. Yeah. Why is that?
Yeah. No. It's not a veil. It's simply
there's no information.
No. But you know, by nature, a transaction when it is black because why do we call it black? Because we can't see it, and if you can't see it, you don't know how large it is. So generally, what we call, you know, how large is the black economy, or how large are the or what proportion of the currency is being used for transactions in black. These are all guesstimates, estimates, whatever you want to call them. But these are not firm numbers. At least there is one piece of evidence that to me tells that actually whatever this figure is, it's quite large figure. Because everybody says, that the press has actually aired this, that there was massive exchanging of the old currency for the new one at a discount. Right? This is on a 30% discount or 25% discount. Massively it was exchanged. Well, if it was massively exchanged at a discount, there was a lot of black money.
No, and I think, of course, the success in a way of this measure was really the fact that politically, and the elections after it all, in a sense, voted for the policy. And just I mean, a complete sample thing, but what did all of you young people think of demonetization? Do you think that it was actually a good decision? Do you think it was worth the short-term impact? I mean, as I said, the long-term impact, we still don't know. But what did you all think?
How hidden was the decision from the political leaders, from the local political leaders, from the gundas?
You will not believe, I did not know about this. I did not know about this. And when I tweeted this, and I sort of only inadvertently, because I was coming from Vijayawada, in interesting episodes there, which I'll tell you later, you know, but, and on the flight, as soon as I got down from the flight, I sort of saw it. There was a message from the PMO, and the copy. This was, you know, I arrived around 9 or 10, so the speech had already been given. So my tweet that went out was that delighted to find out upon arrival about the terrific move, something along those lines. So then people said, you're trying to pretend that you didn't know. But the truth is, I actually didn't know.
Let me go across.
So I've also, by the way, checked with practically every politician. Maybe only the finance minister knew about it. No other ministers knew about it either.
One of the major challenges, and I made that on policy making as a government's main think tank, is really for India. I mean, India is going to be the youngest country in the world by 2020, is jobs. And I think that's probably top of the mind for all these young students sitting here. The problem is that the job growth rate is something which has actually become stagnant, has actually dipped in the last year, according to latest Labour Bureau reports. Is that a big worry? Is the government doing enough to address that? Because after when Prime Minister Modi's election campaign, jobs, Vikas was one of the major thrusts of his election speech. Are we seeing enough movement on that front?
So, I mean, you know, I think as an economist, I think of this problem a little differently than generally it is posed. First, we really don't have great up-to-date data. So when we refer to, you know, jobless growth or something, I'm not quite sure exactly what are we referring to.
So you're a bit skeptical on the
well, I think
reports,
one or the other way, I think we need to have a bit, and the CSO is working on that. So very soon we will actually have a system in place. So data gathering on unemployment will actually be done with much greater frequency and all. But the real issue here, no question, jobs is objective number one, because in the end it is through jobs that you cut poverty in a very direct way. It is through wage increases that you cut poverty in a very direct way, and it is also through jobs that you create growth, which gives revenues to the government, which can then be used for social programs. So absolutely jobs is crucial. Now India's problem really is not so much unemployment, it is underemployment. Any job that is being done is probably being done by more people than are required. So typically I say, you know, a job that can be done by one worker working for 8 hours is being done by 3 workers. What that translates into is a relatively low productivity. Some data here, in agriculture, for example, we employ about half of our workforce. It contributes about 15 to 16% of the GDP. So lots of workers, but not enough output. In manufacturing, you take companies that are less than 20 workers, They employ about 73% of our manufacturing workers, but they produce about 12% of the manufacturing output. Again, lots of workers in these small enterprises, not enough output. Low productivity, that also translates into low wages. Where we have lost out is that we simply have not done the kind of job we needed to do to capture the export markets, the world markets. A lot of advantages of that. One, when you operate in the world markets, you have to supply the quality of the product, but you also have to be cost effective. You have to compete against the best in the world. That forces you to continuously paddle very hard, and that means higher productivity, continuous growth in productivity. It also requires large scale, sorry, so I'll take one more minute, but it also requires large scale production, because when you're really trying to sell your product to something like, let's say, Walmart, they need product on scale. And large scale also brings in a lot of scale economies and therefore lower cost, higher productivity. I think that's something we have missed out on, particularly in the labor intensive industries where you create jobs. You take clothing industry, you take footwear industry, you take electronic industry. These are sectors where China has been incredibly successful, very large exporter. We have not done very well. Sectors where we have done well, take automobile industry, take pharmaceuticals, take IT, ITES, we got large firms. These are firms that actually operate in the export market, most of them, not auto, but auto has been a modest or moderate success, I would say, not like the IT or even pharmaceuticals. So I think we need to change the ecosystem so that large firms from around the world, particularly from China, where the wages now are very high, rising rapidly, and therefore the firms that are in China in these sectors, labor-intensive sectors, want to move out into somewhere else. I think we ought to be the home to those firms. Once these firms are here, the ecosystem will change. Our medium and small firms will also become much more productive within the ecosystem that these large firms create. I think that is the way to go.